say, um, well, I would describe my workplace as incredibly compassionate, thoughtful, caring. Our workplace satisfaction stats are like 97% something. You essentially learn to sort of sidestep that language. The other way they sometimes do this is they'll almost try and present like a false binary. So they'll sort of say, well, it's either this or it's this, and trying to make you choose between these two things. And you may not want to do that. You may want to say, well, actually, I think it's a bit more complicated than the sort of black and white binary that you presented. It's, whatever you want to say. The second lesson is um, a cute little elephant for everyone, which is you want to try not to bring the elephant into the room. And what I mean by that is sometimes people think it's helpful in media interviews to almost to get ahead of what their opponents or other people are saying about them and say, well, I know some people think this, but actually that's not true. And all that does is it gets into people's minds that actually those things are true. And the more time you spend trying to myth bust, for example, it means you're just like arguing your opponent's point rather than actually making the case for what you care about. A good journalist will bring this up and will ask you challenging questions. So you don't need to worry about trying to get ahead of that. It will come into the interview and then you deal with it then, rather than trying to bring it in yourself. So some general principles on how you handle tricky questions. So sometimes you can redirect all of these depend on the situation in the interview. You can redirect them. So if you've been asked to talk about a particular subject and they're asking you about something that you don't have expertise in or you're not qualified to talk about, you could say, that's not what I'm here to talk about. You can reframe a question. So you could say, you could ask that version of it, but you'd be better off asking something else. You can reach out, you can appeal to the audience or the listeners and say, I think what's really important people take from this or what people need to know. Then you can also reiterate, so you can return to your key messages and your statistics, which I'm going to talk about that in a second. Um, I put here for any print or online interviews, you can use on and off the record. What that means is basically anything you say with a journalist can be on the record, but it might be you can ask them if you can speak to them off the record, which means they wouldn't attribute what you're saying to yourself directly. Um, what I will say to that is like this is not a legal thing. You can ask a journalist to speak off the record, and maybe you do, but if they still run what you've said and attribute it to you, there's no like legal recourse that you can say, hey, I said that was off the record, and they would say, journalists adhere to it because it's like a principle, but it's a judgment case on whether you think it's worth it. Um, but that can obviously only be done on like a phone interview or something where you're not like live talking to someone. So you can sort of use on and off the record um, in that process. When it comes to reiterating, there's a three sort of step process that many comms people sort of talk about and use, which is what's called the A plus B plus C. So the A is you acknowledge or address the question being put to you. To then B, bridge, so you transition or guide your answer onto what you'd like to talk about next, which allows you to communicate your key messages. Each of these parts is equally important. Without the bridge, you get stuck agreeing or circling the issue. Without the acknowledgement, you sound defensive or dismissive. Without the communication, you get started talking about something that isn't right for you. So together, you can use these to de-escalate or swerve in a way that allows you to stay in control. And I think at this point, it's also important for me to say that this is not me advocating for you not answering questions. Oh, Lillian, I will give you many examples of B. And I think sometimes this is where people, particularly in politics, get that idea that this is about never answering a question a journalist tells you and just sort of like repeating particular lines. And that's actually not what I mean here is sometimes you can acknowledge or address a question as the sort of fourth example is it says like I might ask you a question you can say yes that is one part of the problem but what I also know from my experience is part of this is this that you can sometimes directly address these questions and talk about them but then bridge away from them. So you can do both. This isn't about trying to be elusive or trying to avoid the answer. It's actually about saying, yeah, that is one part of the issue. But what I'm here to talk about, or what I know, what I can talk to you about, or what's important for my constituents is for me to talk about this. And so it shouldn't necessarily, it should also be something that I think is used as a um almost like a last resort in a sense, because most of the time when you do an interview, you should know why you're there, what you're meant to be talking about. And this is used in situations where maybe you need to just ask something unexpected, or maybe sometimes you don't know the specific answer to that and you don't want to like speak out of turn. Which is sort of at the end, you can sort of say, I don't know about that, but what I can tell you is this, or what I do know, the context I do understand is, X, Y, and Z. So there's a bunch of different ways that people like acknowledge and bridge from different questions. Lots of people do it in lots of different ways. These I just thought would give are some examples. There is um, this is then what we do for the index card. You might write an example of like an acknowledge and a bridge. The communicate will be sort of the stuff in the middle. So you have an example ready for you just in case you need to rely on one and you want to practice one. Um, but this is the sort of, really bare bones essential like thinking you need to do when it comes to doing media interviews is getting down to these sort of specific topics and trying to address them in that way. I'm going to show a quick clip before we get to sort of the question section. Not necessarily of a, this is, I think there's, the reason I put good in quotation marks is everyone's different judgment of media interviews is different. There is no such thing as a perfect media interview. But I think this interview that I'm going to show you is by um, a writer named Akala, talking about knife crime on Channel 4. And I think it's just a useful example. It kind of go through a lot of the things that we talked about from body language, outfit, bridging. He does some really good acknowledging and bridging in this interview. So I'm going to sort of show you it as an example, and then we can sort of sit with it. Maybe people can ask questions, but then that will still give us time for questions afterwards. So I will hit play.
Well, I'm joined now by the rapper and author Akala, whose 2018 book, Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire, looked at how a young child can turn into a knife-carrying teenager. I first met you at the Grenfell disaster, and you were extraordinarily insightful as to what was going on there. And I'm wondering now, perhaps developing the theme in your book, how you analyse what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, so a lot of the research I did, when you look at scholars like Andrew Davies, who writes books about the history of gang crime in Glasgow and Manchester, or Robert McKilwee, who's got volumes of stuff about the history of gang crime in Liverpool, what you see firstly is that this is not a new problem. Every generation pretends gang crime is a new problem. So when you look at the press reports they cite in their scholarship, it's this same sort of sense of moral panic, this unprecedented thing. When actually we've had violent teenage youth gangs for 150, 200 years, maybe even longer. And the social indicators of that violence have remained identical for almost 200 years, as have the sort of facile explanations of violence.
And those social indicators are?
Poverty, domestic abuse, lack of education, so expulsion from school. So, for example, almost half the people in prison today in Britain were expelled from school as children, versus just 1% in the population as a whole. Among young people, about half the young people in young offenders institutes were at some point in care growing up, versus about 1% in the population as a whole. So social indicators have remained identical. Explanations, or what we call moral panics, this sort of idea that just having enough police or just having tougher sentences will work. A good friend of mine, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, did a PhD looking at prisons all around the world, and she didn't find any correlation anywhere between tougher sentences and reduction of crime.
So those people who analyse it as a race problem,
yeah,
these are black gangs, these are Asian gangs, these are...
This is fascinating. I mean, let's just look at the maths. There are 1.2 million black people in London. In a bad year, 50 of them will kill someone. That's less than 0.004% of the black population. Therefore, anyone that thinks that blackness is a sufficient common denominator for violent crime clearly doesn't even understand what a common denominator is. Just to contrast, in a bad year in Glasgow, say 2005, there were 40 murders. There were only 600,000 people in Glasgow. So that year, a Glaswegian as a whole was twice as likely to be killed as a black Londoner. Whereas the commonalities, when you actually look at the demography of violent crime, the commonalities remain the same in Glasgow, Liverpool, Belfast, Naples, or London. Racial explanations are sort of way out for the powers that be, a way out for the wider society. And it's revealing that what happens in London is black on black crime, even when the person committing it is like me, has one white parent, one black parent.
Okay,
What happens in Glasgow, race is not important, or Liverpool, race is not important.
So let's look at the way the government is responding to this. Money, on the one hand, into very deprived areas, which have become more deprived thanks to cuts, presumably.
For sure.
And also denying that policing has anything to do with it.
I'm not, on that, I'm not entirely sure it does or doesn't. Is there any evidence that more police in and of itself will reduce violent crime? Secondly, let's not always believe that violent crime as a whole is on the increase. In 2005 in London, there were 180 murders. Last year, there were just 116. So we have to be very, very careful that the information is accurate, one, and that it's not being used to sort of just say, right, more police is going to solve the problem.
Well, what do you say to the Bobby on the beat who's absent these days? Or when do you see a policeman on the beat?
Like I said, I don't think that's the issue. Having a police officer is not going to undermine the reason why some young people feel so desperate or disenfranchised or enraged that they are killing other young people. So you still need to get to the root causes of the reason, and the root causes are not going to be undermined simply by more police. You need to work with poverty, you need to work with domestic abuse, you need to work with different sociological and psychological factors, but I just don't think having more police on the beat is suddenly going to get rid of this massive...
But that takes money
problem.
And commitment. That means prioritising this end of crime.
And it means believing that the young people who are dying are important and valuable, and being willing to have a nuanced and human view of young people that do sometimes very, very bad things. When they come from a different sector of society, more affluent sector of society, or a more racially approved group, or at least if that's the perception, there is more willing to have a nuanced view of those people.
Can you divine what might be going through the mind of the stabber?
Again, I think that's a little bit too sensationalist, and I'm not perhaps in a position to sort of offer moral condemnation. I went through a period of my life where I carried a knife, despite the fact that I was a straight A student. Some of my friends went to prison for stabbing people or for shooting people, and some of them got stabbed and shot. I think at a very particular period in young people's lives, some young men from very particular circumstances feel a particular way and can do very, very bad things. But even when you look in those same areas, the same young person at 21 is a completely different person at 31. So even then, what we're really talking about is just in a key kind of set of years, how to pull people out of crime and violent crime just during those key years.
Anything people notice? I'm going to stop sharing my screen now because it's we're sort of at the end of the slides anyway. So I thought it was nice to see people. So yeah, some Katie noticing how open body language is. I call it is the greatest of all time. Yeah, very, 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 very good. Yeah, any other thoughts from people? Let me know, Katie, you've come off mute.
Yeah, we can. We'll wrap up in just a second. I wanted to, if anyone in the room has come here because you have an interview lined up, maybe you could just like put your hand up or put it in the chat. If anyone does need support with media interviews, we're around. We would love to support you. I know that Jeffrey's shared the model. What do you call it? The like back of a postcard model. And so what I wanted to say is, as you're preparing that, like, do record yourself, even though it's really cringy. Record yourself doing it, and watch it back. And also feel free to book one of our one-to-one calls if you'd like to practice in person and get some feedback in person. So yeah, we would love to support you to like take the action that comes off the back of session today. So I think if everyone's kind of got no more questions, let's go to the end of the session. As with all of our sessions, we run them free of charge. All of our support for you is free of charge. But we would absolutely love it if we ask you to fill out our evaluation form and tell us how you found this evening's session and if there's anything that we should take into account designing these in future. One of the things I've been wondering about is when it comes this close to the election, would it actually be better if we ran these like 8 till 9 p.m, something like that, once you're back from campaigning, example? So we'd love any feedback you've got, yeah, I think that it's also really important for us to understand whether we're supporting in the way that we hope, and kind of to demonstrate our impact to our funders as well. So thank you. So while you have a look at that form, I'll do the rest of the wrap up, which is to say a huge thank you to Jeff. I've learned loads this session. This has been really helpful and very practical. I hope that everyone here feels more equipped to do prep to do media interviews, and hopefully Trisha, you'll feel more ready to say. Was it you at the beginning who said you've turned down quite a few? Hopefully, we can say yes to more of the coverage and get ourselves out there, and know how and when to steer away and say no as well. That's an important part of it. Thanks for that, Jeff. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Before we close, I wanted to let you know that our next session is next Wednesday, and we have Shay back, and Shay did our session last week on digital self-care, and our session next week with Shay is on self-care and self-care and burnout. So we know it's coming really close to the election day, and we want to make sure that you are feeling sort of equipped and strong to do the last bit. And so we'll need tools to make sure that you are able to continue your energy over these last 4 weeks to the election. We're also hosting bookable one-to-ones. So if you would like to, do have a look here. Our events are all on here on this link. And you can book to come and have a chat with myself or Annabelle about the campaign. We can give you support with your strategy, or just have a cup of tea and a debrief if it's all feeling a bit much. You'd be really welcome. I believe our next one's not next week, but then a week after. I think that's all there is left to say. All of the sessions are recorded and go onto our YouTube channel and onto our Kajabi platform, so do have a look there. Otherwise, thank you all for giving your evening to learn some more tricks up your sleeve to run your campaign, and we hope to see you again soon. And a big thank you to you, Jeff, too.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, guys.
Bye.